House Resolution 773, providing for the expulsion of Representative George Santos from the House of Representatives. Whereas George Anthony DeVolder Santos, known as George Santos, was elected to represent New York's 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives on November 8, 2022. Whereas after Election Day it was revealed George Santos lied about a significant portion of his background, including his education and previous employment. Whereas George Santos has a long history of misrepresenting his and his family's connections to major events, including the Holocaust, September 11th terrorist attacks, and the Pulse nightclub shooting. Whereas on May 9, 2023, George Santos was indicted on 13 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, stealing public funds, and lying on federal financial disclosure forms to the House of Representatives. Whereas a federal grand jury indicted an aide to George Santos' campaign on charges of wire fraud and identity theft for defrauding potential donors by impersonating Speaker Kevin McCarthy's former chief of staff. Whereas on October 5, 2023, George Santos' former campaign treasurer pled guilty to falsifying campaign finance records, including lying about a $500,000 loan that George Santos claimed to have donated to the campaign himself. Whereas on October 10, 2023, George Santos was federally charged with an additional 10 criminal counts. Whereas the additional charges were serious in nature, including conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States of America, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, access device fraud, false statements to the Federal Election Commission, and falsifying records to obstruct the Commission. Whereas the indictment outlined a vast amount of evidence against Santos, including conversations he held with his former campaign treasurer outlining plans to commit the fraud he is charged with. Whereas these charges indicate that George Santos engaged in a serious financial fraud throughout his 2022 campaign for the House of Representatives. Whereas George Santos stole over $44,000 from donors by charging their credit cards without authorization. Whereas George Santos directly profited from his fraudulent actions, including transferring money to his own bank account to buy luxury items and pay off debt. Whereas George Santos engaged in election fraud throughout his 2022 campaign by deceiving voters regarding his biography, defrauding donors, and engaging in other illegal campaign behavior. And whereas as a result of these actions, George Santos is not fit to serve his constituents as a United States representative. Now there it be resolved that pursuant to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, of the Constitution of the United States of America, Representative George Santos be and hereby is expelled from the House.
Madam Speaker, on the matter of expulsion, we are now going down a 3rd attempt for a privilege resolution to expel me from the House of Representatives this week. Just introduced one earlier today, and just earlier this evening we had a second. Here's the case in point. In history, 5 members of Congress have been expelled. All 5 had suffered convictions in a court. All 5 had due process. This expulsion vote simply undermines and underscores the precedent that we've had in this chamber. It starts and puts us in a new direction, a dangerous one that sets a very dangerous precedent for the future. Are we to now assume that one is no longer innocent until proven guilty, and they are in fact guilty until proven innocent? Or are we now to simply assume that because somebody doesn't like you, they get to throw you out of your job? Or better more, does the Constitution bear no consequence, where a duly elected member of the House of Representatives is elected by the general public, but then a couple of politicians decide that they don't like that person? These are all matters and questions that can be brought up. But I'll leave it at this. The process in which the Ethics Committee engaged was incomplete, irresponsible, and littered with hyperbole and littered with biased opinions. The chairman of the committee himself admitted that it wasn't the full extensive process, and therefore he couldn't recommend from the committee a punishment or action. Therefore, cheapening the process of the Ethics Committee, cheapening the process that this country has expected from this chamber. Look, it is not a right to be a member of Congress. The media will always remind me of that every time I talk to them. But it is a privilege. a privilege that you work hard for, and you get elected to Congress as a privilege to represent those who have chosen you. Madam Speaker, I think we can all agree that due process matters and that we should all be very concerned about the way that we are conducting this process. I ask that all my colleagues in the House consider and understand what this means for the future. And to set the record straight and put this in the record, I will not be resigning. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.